In order to say goodbye to people pleasing, you got to look within. You have to understand who you really are and why you are behaving the way you do. Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast, a free resource for women who work in the sports and entertainment industry. Each week, we get real and talk about the things that hold us back and how we can overcome them and keep climbing to the top. And the top is however you define it. We talk about the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Consider this podcast your secret weapon. You will learn from the best in the business and be able to take immediate action with all of the advice that you hear. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake, a leadership development coach and consultant. I've worked in sports for 20 years. 15 of those years were spent working for the Red Sox, Dodgers, and the Cubs. After 15 years of working in the front office, I took a leap of faith and I started my own business. Friends, as a Black woman in sports, I know that the industry can take a toll on your confidence and sometimes leave you feeling defeated. Join me each week so I can support you on your journey. I promise you, each week you will feel stronger and more confident than the week before. So let's get started with this week's episode. How many of you consider yourself a people pleaser? I asked that question to an audience of women who work or aspire to work in the sports and events industry. And along with me, the majority of them raised their hands. A lot of people can relate to being a people pleaser. And let me tell you, not knowing can be damaging to your career. Now, I consider myself a recovering people pleaser. I realized it was no longer serving me. Actually, let's be real, it never served me. I always thought it would help me be likable. And therefore, I hate admitting this, but therefore colleagues would have less resistance to initiatives that I was launching. Wow, y'all, that was not the case at all. I actually went through phases also. What would happen is people pleasing would leave me filled with like that feeling of regret. And I hated that feeling. So I would find the courage to like pump myself up and say, I'm no longer putting others before myself. And I would go into work and have it top of mind and I'd have a good run. And then when work got intense or stressful, I'd fall back on old habits and go back to people pleasing. I'm rolling my eyes, but you can't see it. I didn't even realize it until that lovely feeling of regret popped up. And I was like, how did I get here again? It's difficult. It is a marathon, not a sprint, to change your behavior of being a people pleaser. A lot of us are empathetic and nurturing at our very core, and it's easy for those traits to lead us down a path of people pleasing. I will tell you this. It took work for me to break that bad habit of people pleasing. But once you let it go, it is liberating. It improves your confidence, which I know might seem counterintuitive because it's a habit and you feel good. And right now you probably think you're confident, but you may not really be once you become self-aware about what's happening. In order to say goodbye to people pleasing, you got to look within. You have to understand who you really are and why you are behaving the way you do. Some of that work, I will tell you, some people have told me they have worked on it with their therapist. I asked this question to women in sports, and a lot of them responded saying, I am working on it with my therapist. It's a lot of work. Once you have that level of self-awareness, it always, I promise you, will enhance your confidence. In this episode, I want to talk about how to change your people-pleasing behaviors. I could give you some of these textbook techniques, but that's never been my style. What I did was talk to real women just like you who are going through the same thing or who went through it. They consider themselves recovering people pleasers. And I just simply asked them, what did you do? What worked for you? You know, this is why I have this podcast. There is so much power in our shared experiences. So Game of Her Own listeners, well, let's do this. Before we jump into what works, I want to level set. I want to quickly align on the characteristics of people pleasers and why it's harmful to our careers. So let's start off with 10 signs real quick that you are a people pleaser. Now listen to all of these and see if any of them jump out at you. Be honest with yourself. Number 1, you feel anxious about others' opinions of you. You feel guilty about setting boundaries. Number 3, you never have alone time or me time. Number 4, you feel responsible for the emotional response of others. You know, like on Instagram, someone puts up a meme or TikTok, someone puts up a meme and you're like, oh, Gosh, I feel attacked. That's me. That's triggering. Yeah, that's for me for number 4. You feel responsible for the emotional response of others. I'm definitely triggered. It's difficult for you to say no, even if it's going to overburden you. Another one that gets me. 6, your self-worth comes from external validation. Oh, some of these are just hitting home. 7, you avoid any and all conflict. 8, fear of rejection. Number 9, you want to fit in. And number 10, you are easily influenced by others. According to monster.com, a people pleaser does things simply to appease others, even when something in their gut feels off. So, do any of them, those 10, sound familiar to you or that definition? I think it's no surprise that being a people pleaser can be harmful to your career. It can result in people taking advantage of you. It can lead to burnout, resentment. No one wants to be around someone's energy when they are filled with resentment. You just get frustrated. You're irritated by everything. You're negative. No one wants to be around that. It can result in an increase in your anxiety. So if you're already an anxious person, it's going to make it worse. And if you don't have anxiety, you're about to. Over time, it can lead to a loss of respect and trust from your colleagues. I'll say that one more time. Over time, it can lead to a loss of respect and trust from your colleagues. That's a big one. I should have led with that. Those are 5 reasons why it's harmful to your career. So how do we put a stop to our people-pleasing behaviors? I asked several women who work in the industry, and I can't wait to share some of the responses with you, obviously with their permission. So Rachel shares 2 things that helped her recover as a people pleaser. The first, realizing that as she was working to please others, there is no one responsible for pleasing her other than herself. As Rachel, it is something that we all need to remember. We are responsible for creating our own joy. We are responsible for how we feel, nobody else. What also really stands out here is the working to please others. There's a lot of us that are in service departments, whether it's customer service, client service, ticket service. Our job is to make other people happy. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to do that for a living. There's nothing wrong with getting joy from doing that. I've done it my whole entire career in the fan experience side and the coaching side. It's when you feel compelled at the expense of yourself, when you put others ahead of your priorities. That's when you've fallen into the people-pleasing black hole. Rachel also understands that setting boundaries can be looked at as respectful behavior. Rachel had to do some reverse psychology with herself. She reminds herself that others may respect her more when she puts herself first. And that's true. I have contractors who work for me, and they are very upfront. You have to be when you're a contractor, especially. They're very upfront about their boundaries, and they will call me on it if I start to encroach on those boundaries. As a business owner, I enjoy that because I know that when they're out representing my company, I know they're going to speak up for what's wrong, right? So a client could, start to have scope creep and ask for more than they paid for. Basically, it happens all the time. And they're asking because usually they just don't know or they forget. But I need somebody who's on my team that's going to call that out in a respectful way. They'll call that out. So when my contractors, I know when they respect themselves, I know in their boundaries, I know that they're going to also do the same for my business. Rachel, thanks for sharing. All right. So like Rachel, Molly, she's a client who had to learn to create and enforce boundaries. She said, and I quote, "When you were coaching me and we were talking about boundaries, you said something along the lines of, if you say yes to do something for someone else, what are you saying no to? Is saying yes going to help you achieve your goals, or is it going to deprioritize your goals? What are you saying no to if you say yes to someone else?" That has stuck with me and helps me determine what I say yes to, end quote. So if you have trouble setting boundaries when someone asks you to take something on, my recommendation is to pause. Say something simple. Let me get back to you. Take time to understand. 1, if you truly want to take on that work. 2, do you have the bandwidth? We only have a certain amount of time in the day. You're going to have to say no to something else. That's okay. But think, what will I say no to? Will I have regret that I said yes to this opportunity or yes to this request? Or will I be fulfilled by saying it? So will I have regret by saying yes and no to something else? Or will I be fulfilled by saying yes to it? Molly, thank you for sharing. I'm going to give you guys a small example. My favorite business coach just came to town. So we worked together for about 2.5 years, and she's had a huge impact on my career. Our schedules aligned on a Friday. Now, on Fridays, I don't take any meetings. I don't do lunch because it breaks up my day and it's hard for me to get going again. I solely focus on my business and wrap up the week and any client loose ends that I have. Well, I knew the chance of our schedules aligning in the future, if she happened to be back in town again, would probably be slim. I had to think about it. Connection and friendship are something I value. So I said yes to lunch and decided I'm going to work a few hours on Saturday morning to catch up. I knew lunch with Natalie would leave me feeling fulfilled. I knew we wouldn't be talking about work. It wasn't a business meeting. She wasn't coaching me. And because it wasn't a business meeting, it was even harder to say yes. But connection and friendship are something that I value. So set your boundaries and make sure you feel fulfilled, even when you break them every now and then. Let's move on to Megan, who's an executive in the industry. Something that helped her put an end to people pleasing was active recovery. She said she identified it, which was the hardest part. And the active part is having to constantly remind herself to check when she's slipping. First of all, Megan, thank you for sharing. Second, yes, you have to identify that you're doing it. That can be difficult for so many reasons for all of us, including, here's the one that makes it really difficult, including that you don't want to admit it to yourself. So like Megan, self-awareness is going to help you as you grow and evolve. Megan, thanks for sharing. Okay, last but certainly not least, Jess. She's also a self-proclaimed recovering people pleaser. And she said that she started with small pushbacks and saying no. And that helped her realize, the world's not going to fall apart. And in fact, she felt relieved and empowered in those little moments. And it's what helped her with the bigger moments when she was going to stand her ground. First of all, thank you, Jess, for sharing. Y'all, it is a powerful thing. Like Jess, I started out small. For me, I would say no. I would get super, I don't know why I'm laughing at myself, but I get super creative and find a nice way to say no. And it would be like one of those long emails, like, what? It was such a waste of my time. There was so much color commentary that nobody needed. It was a waste of my time and the person who read it. They just wanted to hear yes or no. Now I say no, thank you. Thank you for thinking of me. If I want to be included or offered that opportunity in the future, I say it. If I don't, I don't. I just simply say, no, thank you. I don't worry about anyone else's feelings because I'm being respectful in my response. So if they're going to feel, that person's going to feel a certain type of way because I'm holding and protecting my boundaries, that is their problem, not mine. So as my father always says, the only one who's responsible for how you feel is you. Now, if you are struggling with any of those traits of being a people pleaser, please know that one, you're not alone. Two, it is normal. My father said that line to me throughout my entire childhood, and it was still difficult to live by it as an adult. So my friends, the key is to identify that you're doing it and start working on it. It can be small progress, just like the women you heard from. Change does not happen overnight. As always, my friends, thank you for spending some time with me. I know you have a lot of choices. Until next week, for now, let's make sure to keep in touch. You can follow me at Jahaan Blake on Instagram and LinkedIn. I love hearing from you. Talk soon.